You are not tired because life is hard. You are tired because you keep letting your mind rule you while reason stands aside. Subscribe and stay here for steady Stoic teaching that speaks plainly, respects your time, and helps you practice virtue in ordinary days. In this series, we will cut through complaint, fear, desire, praise, and delay. We will keep returning to what belongs to you and what does not. We will examine judgment before reaction, duty before comfort, and self-command before emotion. This is not about feeling better for a moment. It is about becoming a person you can trust when the day is heavy, when others are difficult, and when no one is watching. Stay with this and begin the work of rebuilding yourself with reason, discipline, and calm honesty. Each day will ask more of you than comfort ever has, and worth every effort today. Number 1. Confront your wasted habits and reclaim disciplined daily actions. You wake up already tired of yourself. Not tired from work, not tired from responsibility, tired from watching your own mind repeat the same weak patterns every day while pretending tomorrow will be different. You already know which habits are destroying your clarity. You already know which actions leave you ashamed when the day ends, yet you continue them as if repetition will somehow remove the cost. It will not. Every repeated act becomes a deeper chain. Every excuse becomes permission for future weakness. Every delay trains your mind to trust comfort more than reason. Look carefully at your life without defending it. This is where rebuilding begins, not with motivation, not with promises, not with emotional excitement that disappears by morning. A man changes only when he stops lying to himself about the condition of his own character. You say you want peace, yet your habits create disorder. You say you want discipline, yet you obey every impulse that asks for ease. You say you want respect, yet you cannot trust yourself alone in a room with distraction. This is not fate. This is not bad luck. This is daily surrender. The mind becomes whatever it repeatedly obeys. If you obey laziness long enough, then effort begins to feel unnatural. If you obey distraction long enough, then silence begins to feel uncomfortable. If you obey appetite long enough, then restraint begins to feel painful. You trained yourself into this condition through repeated permission. You can train yourself out through repeated correction. The problem is not that you have failed before. The problem is that you keep treating failure casually. You continue speaking about your wasted habits as though they are small, harmless flaws when they are shaping the entire direction of your life. Every hour wasted in mindless reaction is a piece of your existence permanently traded away. You do not get those hours back. Life is not waiting for you to become ready. Life is being spent while you hesitate. You keep searching for a future version of yourself that already possesses discipline while refusing to practice disciplined actions today. But character is not discovered. Character is built through repeated choices made under resistance. A man becomes disciplined by doing disciplined things while still feeling undisciplined. He becomes calm by practicing calmness while anger still exists within him. He becomes strong by carrying responsibility while weakness still speaks inside him. Stop waiting to feel different before acting differently. Your habits reveal what truly rules you, not your words, not your intentions. Your repeated actions expose your master. If you cannot rise when you plan to rise, then comfort rules you. If you cannot stop consuming what weakens your mind, then appetite rules you. If you cannot remain silent when anger appears, then emotion rules you. A person who cannot govern himself will always become a servant to impulse. This is why your first task is not changing your entire life at once. Your first task is reclaiming authority over your own actions. A single disciplined act done consciously has more value than endless plans never carried into reality. Wake up when you said you would wake up. Stand immediately. Do not negotiate with the bed. The negotiation itself is already defeat. Your mind must learn that your decisions are final. Every time you break your own command, you weaken trust within yourself. Every time you obey your rational decision despite discomfort, you strengthen the ruling part of the mind. Eat with restraint. Speak with restraint. Rest with restraint. Work with restraint. Stoic discipline is not punishment, it is proper order. A person ruled by impulse becomes chaotic because every passing feeling gains authority over their behavior. But feelings are temporary. Reason must govern what is temporary. You have spent enough years reacting automatically. Someone disrespects you and anger controls the day. A difficulty appears and avoidance controls your actions. Loneliness appears and distraction controls your attention. Fatigue appears and excuses control your choices. You keep handing power to passing conditions as though they determine who you are. They do not. Your character is revealed precisely when conditions become difficult. Anyone can appear disciplined when life feels easy. The test comes when discomfort enters the room. Can you still act according to reason when your emotions demand escape? Can you still remain honest when dishonesty would benefit you? Can you still stay calm when your pride feels attacked? This is where rebuilding happens, not in comfort, in resistance. You must begin observing yourself with relentless honesty. Throughout the day, pause and examine the movement of your mind. Notice how quickly your attention runs toward distraction when work becomes uncomfortable. Notice how quickly blame appears when you feel exposed. Notice how often you seek stimulation simply because silence forces you to confront yourself. Most people fear silence because silence removes distraction and reveals the condition of their inner life. When there is no noise left, you finally hear the disorder within you clearly. This is why many remain constantly entertained, not because entertainment brings peace, but because self-examination demands courage. Sit quietly for a few minutes every morning before the world reaches you. Do not touch distraction immediately. Do not rush to consume noise. Sit and ask yourself what kind of person you intend to be today. Ask yourself where weakness usually enters your life. Ask yourself which habit repeatedly steals your dignity. Bring it fully into awareness before the day begins. Then prepare your mind for resistance. Expect temptation. Expect irritation. Expect fatigue. Expect moments where your old habits demand obedience. A disciplined person is not surprised by internal struggle. He anticipates it. He trains for it. You suffer because you keep expecting comfort from a world that never promised it. You expect people to behave according to your wishes. You expect circumstances to cooperate with your plans. You expect your emotions to remain stable. Then when reality refuses your demands, you become frustrated and reactive. But peace begins the moment you separate what belongs to you from what does not. Your opinions belong to you. Your choices belong to you. Your actions belong to you. Your discipline belongs to you. But the behavior of others does not belong to you. The opinions of others do not belong to you. Delays do not belong to you. Outcomes do not belong to you. The wasted habit of emotional reaction often begins because you keep trying to control what was never yours to command. You waste energy fighting reality instead of governing yourself within reality. A man insults you. Immediately the impulse appears to retaliate. But pause. Ask yourself what actually belongs to you in this moment. His words do not belong to you. Your response does. Your judgment does. Your composure does. This pause between impulse and action is where freedom begins. Without this pause, you live mechanically. Every external event pulls your strings. Every inconvenience dictates your state of mind. You become emotionally owned by circumstances. But a disciplined mind examines impressions before obeying them. Not every thought deserves belief. Not every emotion deserves action. You feel anger. Good. Observe it without surrendering to it. You feel fear. Good. Examine it carefully before accepting its authority. You feel laziness. Good. Continue the task anyway. Stoic practice does not require the removal of emotion. It requires the governance of action through reason rather than emotional impulse. Your habits improve when your awareness improves. Right now, many of your actions happen unconsciously. You reach for distraction automatically. You complain automatically. You avoid automatically. You indulge automatically. Rebuilding yourself requires interrupting automatic behavior and replacing it with conscious choice. This will feel uncomfortable because your mind has been trained toward ease. Do not interpret discomfort as failure. Discomfort is evidence that training has begun. A weak body shakes under resistance because it has not yet adapted. The same is true for character. You must stop worshipping comfort. Comfort has made your mind soft. It has convinced you that every unpleasant feeling should be escaped immediately, but a person who cannot tolerate discomfort cannot govern himself. The moment difficulty appears, he abandons principle for relief. Practice voluntary discomfort daily. Deny yourself unnecessary pleasure sometimes. Rise earlier than required. Take the difficult task first instead of the easiest one. Sit with boredom without reaching for stimulation. Train yourself to discover that discomfort is survivable. You are weaker than you could be because you avoid too much. Every avoided responsibility increases fear. Every postponed task strengthens anxiety. Every excuse deepens self-contempt. You already know this because you feel it at night. You feel the quiet disappointment of knowing you could have acted better but chose ease instead. Do not run from that feeling. Listen to it carefully. That discomfort is not your enemy. It is the remaining healthy part of your conscience refusing to die. A man fully corrupted by weakness no longer feels disturbed by his own behavior. The fact that you still feel conflict means your rational nature is still alive beneath the habits. Protect it. Your daily actions are either feeding strength or feeding weakness. There is no neutral direction. Every repeated complaint trains helplessness. Every repeated act of restraint trains discipline. Every repeated excuse trains cowardice. Every repeated act of honesty trains integrity. Character is built quietly through repetition. This is why you must examine your evenings honestly. Before sleep, sit alone and review the day without self-hatred and without self-protection. Ask yourself where you acted according to reason. Ask yourself where impulse defeated you. Ask yourself where you wasted time. Ask yourself where you abandoned discipline for comfort. Do not perform this examination to punish yourself. Perform it to see clearly. A person who refuses to examine himself cannot improve because he remains hidden from his own awareness. You spend too much time analyzing other people while remaining ignorant of yourself. You notice their flaws quickly, their dishonesty, their laziness, their pride, their selfishness. Yet you overlook the same tendencies within your own conduct. Stoic discipline begins when attention returns inward. Correct yourself before criticizing others. Your life improves the moment you stop demanding perfection from the world while excusing disorder within yourself. There will be days when your mind resists every disciplined action. On those days, act anyway. Do not wait for enthusiasm. A rational person does what is necessary whether emotion cooperates or not. If your actions depend entirely on feeling motivated, then your emotions have become your ruler. Your mind must learn obedience to reason. This requires repetition, daily repetition, quiet repetition, not dramatic transformation, not public declarations. Real change is usually invisible at first. A man wakes up on time repeatedly. He controls his speech repeatedly. He completes necessary work repeatedly. He refuses distraction repeatedly. Slowly, the structure of his character changes. Do not underestimate small disciplined actions. A stable life is built from them. When you make your bed properly despite laziness, you strengthen order. When you complete difficult work before seeking pleasure, you strengthen priority. When you remain calm during insult, you strengthen self-command. When you speak truthfully despite fear, you strengthen integrity. These moments appear small, but they shape the person you become. You keep imagining the transformation arrives through one dramatic breakthrough while ignoring the daily choices already available to you. Your future character is hidden inside your present routines. Look honestly at your habits and you will see your future clearly. If you continue wasting attention on meaningless distraction, your mind will weaken further. If you continue avoiding difficulty, your confidence will continue shrinking. If you continue speaking carelessly, your relationships will continue deteriorating. If you continue surrendering to appetite, your self-respect will continue collapsing. Nothing changes until behavior changes. This is why Stoic discipline focuses on action rather than fantasy. Your thoughts matter because they guide action. Your judgments matter because they influence behavior. But philosophy means nothing if it never enters your conduct. Do not merely admire discipline, practice it. Do not merely speak about virtue, embody it. Do not merely consume wisdom, live according to it. The world does not need more people who can describe self-mastery while remaining slaves to impulse. The world needs individuals capable of governing themselves under pressure. Begin where you are, not where you wish you were. If your habits are broken, then rebuild them one action at a time. If your attention is weak, then strengthen it through focused work. If your speech is careless, then slow down before speaking. If your mind constantly seeks escape, then practice remaining present with difficulty instead of fleeing from it. Your life changes when your standards become stronger than your excuses. Stop asking whether discipline feels pleasant. Ask whether it is necessary. Stop asking whether restraint feels comfortable. Ask whether indulgence has improved your life. Stop asking whether change feels difficult. Ask yourself how much longer you are willing to remain divided against your own rational nature. You know the answer already. You are tired of betraying yourself. You are tired of promising action while repeating delay. You are tired of reaching the end of another wasted day knowing you could have lived with greater clarity and courage. Good. Use that dissatisfaction properly. Let it awaken responsibility instead of self-pity. Self-pity weakens action because it keeps attention fixed on suffering rather than responsibility. Stoic discipline directs attention toward what can still be governed right now. This moment, this choice, this action. That is where your power exists. Not in rewriting the past, not in controlling tomorrow, not in demanding different circumstances. Your power exists in governing your present judgment and your present conduct with honesty. The person you could become is waiting behind disciplined action, but that person will never appear while you continue protecting your current weakness from examination. Look directly at your wasted habits. Name them clearly. Stop disguising them with gentle language. Call laziness laziness. Call avoidance avoidance. Call excess excess. Truth becomes useful only when spoken honestly. Then begin, not next week. Not after another failure, not after another excuse disguised as preparation. Begin with one disciplined morning, then another. Begin with one restrained response, then another. Begin with one completed responsibility without complaint, then another. A stable character is built through repeated obedience to reason. One day you will wake up and realize your mind no longer reacts with the same chaos. The distractions will still exist, but they will no longer command you. The impulses will still appear, but they will no longer own your decisions. Difficulties will still come, but they will no longer destroy your composure. Why? Because you finally stopped feeding weakness every day. Remember this carefully. Your habits are not separate from your character. Your habits are your character practiced repeatedly. Every action either strengthens your ruling mind or weakens it. Every moment either trains discipline or trains surrender. Life is passing, whether you govern yourself or not. The question is not whether time will move. It will. The question is whether you will continue arriving at the end of your days disappointed by your own lack of self-command, or whether you will finally live in a way that allows you to respect yourself when night arrives. No one can do this work for you. No teacher can hand you discipline. No speech can replace daily action. No amount of wisdom matters if you refuse to practice it. But if you begin now with honesty and steady effort, then your life can still become ordered, your mind can still become clear, your habits can still become disciplined, your character can still become worthy of respect. Not because the world changed, because you did. Number 2, accept what you cannot control and release needless suffering. Your suffering increases every time you demand control over what was never placed in your hands. You exhaust your mind trying to command outcomes that belong to chance circumstances, other people, and time itself. Then you call the resulting frustration bad luck, when in truth it began as confusion inside your own judgment. Look honestly at how much of your inner turmoil comes from resistance to reality. Someone speaks against you and your peace disappears because you expected their approval. Plans fail and bitterness enters because you expected life to obey your schedule. A person changes and you collapse inward because you expected permanence from a human being who was never yours to control. Again and again your pain grows from attachment to things outside your authority. You do not suffer only because difficult events happen. You suffer because your mind keeps arguing with the fact that they happened at all. Reality does not ask permission before it changes your circumstances. Bodies weaken, relationships shift, opportunities disappear, people misunderstand you. Effort sometimes fails to produce the outcome you hoped for. None of this violates the order of life. The mistake is believing you were promised exemption from uncertainty. Your mind keeps saying this should not be happening, while reality continues happening anyway. That conflict is draining your strength. A disciplined mind does not waste itself fighting what already exists. It turns immediately toward the only territory where freedom is possible, which is the governance of judgment, choice, and action. This is the dividing line between inner slavery and inner stability. One person spends life demanding control over external events and remains emotionally shaken by every change. Another governs his own responses carefully and remains steady even while circumstances move against him. You have trained yourself to believe that peace will arrive once the world finally behaves according to your preferences. But the world has never made such an agreement with you. People will continue disappointing expectations. Delays will continue appearing without warning. Unfairness will continue existing. Your body will continue aging. The future will continue remaining uncertain. You can spend your life resenting these truths, or you can begin training yourself to live wisely within them. The first step is learning to separate what belongs to you from what does not. Your thoughts belong to you. Your intentions belong to you. Your choices belong to you. Your willingness to act with honesty belongs to you. Your ability to restrain destructive impulses belongs to you. But the opinions people hold about you do not belong to you. The final result of your efforts does not fully belong to you. The past does not belong to you. The weather does not belong to you. Other people's emotions, decisions, and loyalties do not belong to you. Confusion begins when you treat borrowed territory as personal property. Notice how quickly anxiety enters when you attempt to manage what another person thinks of you. You replay conversations repeatedly, searching for control over an impression already formed inside another mind. You shape your actions around avoiding criticism. You become emotionally dependent on approval that can disappear at any moment. This is not freedom. This is quiet captivity. A person ruled by external validation can never remain stable because public opinion changes constantly. One day you are praised, the next day you are ignored. If your peace depends on those movements, then your inner life will always remain fragile. Return your attention to what can actually be governed. Ask yourself whether your actions were honest. Ask yourself whether your conduct reflected reason and self-command. Ask yourself whether you acted according to your principles even when emotions resisted. That is where dignity lives. You keep trying to control outcomes while neglecting the quality of your own character. A man may act wisely and still experience failure. Another may act dishonestly and still receive temporary reward. If you judge life only by external results, then your values will collapse whenever reality becomes unpredictable. But if you judge yourself by the condition of your character, then your stability no longer depends on fortune. This is why discipline begins inside judgment rather than circumstance. You cannot always decide what happens around you, but you can decide what interpretation enters your mind. Between the event and the emotional reaction, there is a moment often ignored by undisciplined people. In that moment, your judgment forms. That judgment creates the suffering that follows. Someone disagrees with you. Immediately your mind declares disrespect. Anger rises. Defensiveness follows. But examine the process carefully. The event itself was only words spoken by another person. The suffering began when your judgment interpreted disagreement as injury. A delay occurs and your mind immediately calls it disaster. Fear appears before reason has even examined the situation. A mistake happens and your mind declares the entire day ruined. One event becomes total defeat because your judgment exaggerated its meaning. You are not being destroyed by events alone. You are being disturbed by unchecked interpretations. This is why a disciplined person learns to pause before agreeing with every thought. Not every impression deserves immediate belief. Your first emotional reaction is not always truth. Sometimes it is habit. Sometimes it is wounded pride. Sometimes it is fear speaking with confidence. Train yourself to ask one question whenever strong emotion appears. Is this within my control or beyond it? If it is beyond your control, then resentment will not improve it. Complaining will not reverse it. Anxiety will not command it into obedience. You may still feel disappointment because you are human, but you do not need to surrender your reason to disappointment. You have spent too much time feeding emotional storms through constant mental repetition. A painful event happens once, then the mind repeats it 100 times through memory, imagination, and bitterness. Long after the moment has passed, you continue reopening the wound through attention. Notice how often your suffering is prolonged by your own cooperation with destructive thinking. You replay insults repeatedly. You rehearse future fears repeatedly. You revisit old regrets repeatedly. Then you wonder why your mind feels heavy. A person cannot carry peace while constantly feeding disturbance through unnecessary mental attachment. Release does not mean pretending events never mattered. Release means refusing to let them govern your inner condition forever. You are carrying too much that does not belong in the present moment. A conversation from years ago still shapes your reactions. A failure from the past still defines your confidence. A fear about tomorrow steals your ability to act wisely today. Meanwhile, life continues passing while your attention remains trapped between memory and anticipation. Return yourself to the present task. The present is where reason can operate. The present is where discipline can be practiced. The present is where choices are made. You cannot govern yesterday because it no longer exists. You cannot fully govern tomorrow because it has not yet arrived. But you can govern the judgment forming inside you now. This requires daily training because the undisciplined mind constantly wanders toward what it cannot control. Begin your mornings by preparing your judgment before entering the day. Sit quietly for a few moments before the noise of the world reaches you. Remind yourself that people may behave selfishly, impatiently, or dishonestly. Remind yourself that plans may change unexpectedly. Remind yourself that discomfort may arrive without warning. Do not do this to become fearful. Do it so your mind stops demanding perfection from reality. A prepared mind remains calmer because it no longer treats difficulty as a personal injustice. It understands that obstacles belong to life itself. When hardship arrives, it says, "This is unpleasant, but not surprising. Now let me govern myself properly within it." This shift changes everything. Instead of asking, "Why is this happening to me?" you begin asking, "What response does reason require from me now?" One question creates helplessness. The other creates responsibility. Your reactions reveal the condition of your inner discipline. If every inconvenience destroys your composure, then your peace was never stable. If every criticism controls your emotions, then your self-worth was never rooted in character. If every uncertain outcome produces panic, then your mind has become dependent on guarantees life cannot provide. You must become stronger than circumstance, not by controlling the world, but by controlling your participation in emotional chaos. There is a form of suffering created entirely through resistance. You resist aging, so you become bitter toward time. You resist uncertainty, so you become anxious about the future. You resist other people's flaws, so you become consumed by resentment. You resist the fact that life includes pain, so you become shocked whenever difficulty arrives. Acceptance removes this unnecessary conflict. Acceptance is not weakness, it is clear sight. It is the refusal to waste energy denying reality. Once you accept the existence of something, you can finally respond wisely to it. A disciplined person accepts illness without surrendering dignity, accepts criticism without abandoning reason, accepts loss without collapsing into self-destruction, accepts uncertainty without demanding impossible guarantees. This strength does not appear automatically. It must be practiced daily through small moments of restraint and awareness. When irritation appears, pause before speaking. Notice how quickly the mind wants immediate reaction. Refuse that impulse. Let reason examine the situation first. When anxiety about the future appears, return attention to the present responsibility in front of you. Complete the task available now, instead of mentally wandering through imagined disasters. When another person behaves poorly, remind yourself that their actions belong to their character, not yours. Your responsibility is your own conduct. When disappointment appears, ask whether you are grieving reality itself, or grieving the collapse of an expectation you attached to reality. These practices seem simple, but they expose how undisciplined the mind becomes when left unexamined. Your mind has habits, just as your body does. If you repeatedly indulge fear, then fear strengthens. If you repeatedly indulge complaint, then complaint becomes automatic. If you repeatedly interpret inconvenience as catastrophe, then emotional fragility deepens. But the opposite is also true. Each time you pause before reacting, you strengthen self-command. Each time you accept what cannot be changed, you strengthen inner steadiness. Each time you redirect attention toward your own choices, instead of external events, you strengthen freedom. Freedom is not getting everything you want. Freedom is remaining governed by reason, even when life refuses your preferences. Look carefully at how much energy you waste trying to force certainty from an uncertain world. You want guarantees before acting, guarantees before trusting, guarantees before beginning. But no human being receives complete certainty. The future remains hidden from everyone. Still you must live. Still you must choose. Still you must act according to principle despite uncertainty. Courage is not the absence of unpredictability. Courage is continuing to act rationally while unpredictability exists. Do not wait for life to become perfectly manageable before practicing peace. Peace built upon perfect conditions collapses the moment conditions change. Build peace instead upon disciplined judgment. There will always be something outside your control. The weather changes, markets collapse, people leave, bodies become ill, opinions shift. None of these events can fully determine your character unless you hand over authority willingly. Stop surrendering your inner life to external movement. You become calmer when you stop taking every event personally. Not everything that happens is an attack against you. Sometimes people act from ignorance. Sometimes circumstances unfold without intention. Sometimes life simply follows its own course without consulting your preferences. Your task is not to command the entire world into agreement with your desires. Your task is to meet reality with clarity, discipline, and self-command. At night, examine yourself honestly. Ask where you became emotionally attached to what you could not govern. Ask where expectation created frustration. Ask where fear exaggerated uncertainty. Ask where you abandoned reason because events refused your demands. Do not judge yourself harshly during this examination. Judge yourself truthfully. Truthful examination leads to correction. Self-deception leads to repetition. A person who refuses to examine his own judgments remains trapped inside them. You do not need a different world to begin living wisely. You need a more disciplined relationship with your own mind. The next time life refuses your expectations, pause before reacting. Breathe once. Separate the event from your interpretation. Ask yourself what belongs to you in this moment. Then direct your energy only toward that. This is the path out of needless suffering. Not control over everything. Control over yourself. Number 3. Observe your thoughts and reject every weak emotional impulse. Your mind speaks before you do. It reacts before you examine. It forms judgments before reason has entered the room. Then you wonder why your life feels unstable while you continue obeying thoughts that were never tested for truth. A single careless thought can direct an entire day toward disorder. One assumption becomes anger. One fear becomes avoidance. One insult becomes hours of emotional disturbance. Your life is not being shaped only by events. It is being shaped by the unexamined interpretations constantly moving through your mind without resistance. You think you are suffering from difficult circumstances when often you are suffering from automatic thinking left completely undisciplined. Watch your mind carefully during ordinary moments, and you will begin to see the problem clearly. Someone delays responding to you, and immediately the mind invents rejection. A small mistake occurs, and the mind declares failure. A person speaks sharply, and the mind prepares retaliation before understanding the situation fully. Your inner life moves so quickly that reason rarely gets the opportunity to examine what emotion is trying to command. This is how weak impulses gain authority. Not because they are wise, because they arrive first. You have spent years strengthening emotional reflexes while neglecting rational examination. Now your reactions happen automatically. Irritation appears and speech becomes careless. Fear appears and action disappears. Desire appears and restraint collapses. Pride feels threatened and honesty vanishes. Then afterward you regret what was said, what was chosen, what was avoided. The regret comes because another part of you already knows you were capable of governing yourself better than you did. There is something within you that recognizes the difference between reaction and reason. That part must become stronger. You cannot stop thoughts from appearing immediately. Impressions arrive naturally. Emotions rise naturally. The disciplined life does not require becoming emotionless. It requires refusing to hand over authority the moment emotion enters consciousness. Your first thought is not your final master unless you surrender to it. A disciplined person learns to observe thoughts before identifying with them. Anger may appear, but he does not immediately become anger. Fear may appear, but he does not immediately obey fear. Desire may appear, but he does not immediately pursue pleasure. He examines each impulse as a guard examines strangers entering a city. You allow too many destructive thoughts to pass through your mind without challenge. A thought says you are weak and you accept it completely. A thought says another person ruined your peace and you agree instantly. A thought says temporary pleasure matters more than long-term integrity and you follow it without resistance. You keep treating passing mental impressions as unquestionable truth. This is why your inner life feels crowded and unstable. Your mind has no gatekeeper. Begin developing the discipline of observation, not tomorrow, today. Throughout the day, notice what enters your mind. Notice how quickly judgment forms. Notice which situations consistently weaken your clarity. Observe yourself without denial. When criticism appears, observe whether pride immediately demands defense. When temptation appears, observe how reason begins negotiating with appetite. When discomfort appears, observe how quickly the mind searches for escape instead of endurance. You cannot govern what you refuse to examine. Many people remain strangers to themselves because they never pause long enough to witness the movements of their own mind honestly. They are busy reacting, busy consuming noise, busy distracting themselves from self-awareness. Yet the unobserved mind quietly directs every choice underneath the surface. Your life follows the condition of your inner attention. If attention becomes weak, then impulse becomes stronger. If attention becomes careless, then habits become destructive. If attention becomes scattered, then judgment becomes unstable. This is why the disciplined person protects attention carefully. He understands that where attention repeatedly goes, character eventually follows. Your mind has been trained by repetition. Every time you indulged resentment without examination, resentment became easier. Every time you obeyed fear without resistance, fear gained authority. Every time you surrendered to distraction, your ability to remain present weakened. Now you must reverse the training consciously. The next time a strong emotion appears, do not rush to express it. Pause silently first. Observe what is happening inside you. Ask yourself what judgment created the emotion. Ask whether that judgment is rational or exaggerated. Ask whether your reaction will improve your character or weaken it. This pause is small but powerful. Within it, your freedom begins. Without examination, your emotions govern you like sudden weather controlling an unprepared traveler. One harsh word ruins your peace. One disappointment ruins your discipline. One craving ruins your restraint. You become emotionally dependent on whatever feeling arrives strongest in the moment, but feelings are unstable rulers. An impulse demands immediate satisfaction without considering consequences. Reason examines long-term effects before choosing action. One seeks relief. The other seeks alignment with virtue. You already know the cost of obeying every emotional impulse. Look at your regrets honestly. Many began with a moment where feeling became stronger than judgment. You spoke when silence was wiser. You escaped responsibility when endurance was needed. You chased pleasure while ignoring the damage following behind it. Weak impulses always promise immediate comfort while hiding future disorder. This is why self-command requires vigilance even in ordinary moments. A careless conversation can strengthen gossip. A careless purchase can strengthen excess. A careless hour spent feeding distraction can weaken the mind for the rest of the day. No action disappears completely. Every action trains something within you. You are always becoming more disciplined or more impulsive through repetition. Observe how your mind behaves when it does not receive what it wants immediately. Irritation rises, restlessness appears, complaints begin forming. This reveals how attached you have become to preference and convenience. A strong mind remains steady even when denied comfort. Practice delaying impulsive reactions intentionally. When anger rises, wait before answering. When desire appears, delay gratification briefly instead of obeying instantly. When the urge for distraction appears, remain with the present task a little longer. These moments seem small, but they retrain the relationship between impulse and action. Right now, many of your emotions operate like commands. You feel something and immediately move toward expression. But emotion is information, not instruction. It may reveal something worth examining, but it does not deserve automatic obedience. A person becomes dangerous to himself when he treats every emotional state as a reliable guide. Fear often exaggerates danger. Pride often exaggerates insult. Desire often exaggerates pleasure. Sadness often exaggerates hopelessness. Reason must investigate before action begins. This requires patience because emotional impulses prefer speed. They do not want examination. Anger wants immediate release. Craving wants immediate satisfaction. Anxiety wants immediate certainty. But the disciplined mind slows the process deliberately. You must stop admiring emotional intensity as though it represents truth. Loud feelings are not always honest feelings. A calm judgment formed through examination has more value than emotional certainty produced through impulse. Your mind becomes clearer when you stop feeding every reaction. Notice how much unnecessary suffering begins through imagination. An event happens once, but the mind continues extending it through invented scenarios. One criticism becomes imagined rejection by everyone. One challenge becomes imagined disaster. One uncertainty becomes endless mental rehearsal of failure. You are exhausting yourself through fictional suffering. Return attention to facts instead of dramatic interpretation. Ask yourself what actually happened rather than what fear predicts may happen. Ask yourself what evidence truly exists instead of what emotion assumes. A disciplined mind refuses to cooperate with exaggeration. This does not mean denying difficulty. It means seeing difficulty accurately rather than emotionally enlarging it. There will be moments when strong emotion still enters forcefully. Do not become discouraged by this. Progress is not measured by never feeling disturbance. Progress is measured by how quickly reason regains authority afterward. A person who trains his mind consistently becomes harder to overthrow internally. Anger may appear, but it does not dominate the entire day. Fear may arise, but it does not cancel responsibility. Desire may call for indulgence, but it no longer receives immediate obedience. This is inner strength, not the absence of emotion, but the refusal to become enslaved by it. Your mornings must become a period of mental preparation rather than immediate distraction. Do not begin each day by flooding your attention with noise, stimulation, and reaction. Sit quietly for a few moments and prepare the ruling part of your mind. Remind yourself that emotions will appear today. Difficult people will appear today. Temptations will appear today. Fatigue will appear today. None of these conditions remove your responsibility to govern yourself wisely. Enter the day alert rather than mentally asleep. Throughout the day, practice returning attention to the present moment whenever the mind wanders into unnecessary emotional disturbance. If resentment pulls attention backward, return to the task before you now. If fear drags attention into the future, return to the action available now. The disciplined mind remains rooted in present responsibility instead of becoming lost inside uncontrolled mental movement. At night, review your reactions honestly. Ask where you surrendered too quickly to emotion. Ask where your judgments became distorted by pride, fear, or craving. Ask where silence would have been stronger than reaction. Ask where patience would have produced greater clarity than impulse. This examination is not for shame, it is for correction. A person who refuses to study his own mind remains controlled by habits he barely understands. You cannot build a disciplined life upon undisciplined thinking. Every outward action begins inwardly first. Before behavior becomes visible, judgment has already formed inside the mind. This is why the work must begin at the level of thought itself. You are responsible for what you repeatedly allow your mind to entertain. If you continually feed envy, your peace weakens. If you continually feed resentment, your character hardens. If you continually feed distraction, your attention fractures. But if you repeatedly feed reason, honesty, restraint, and courage, then the mind slowly becomes ordered. Do not expect immediate transformation. Years of emotional habit cannot disappear in a single day. But every moment of conscious observation weakens unconscious reaction. Every examined judgment strengthens rational awareness. Every resisted impulse builds greater self-command. The undisciplined mind seeks permission to react. The disciplined mind seeks understanding before action. This difference changes relationships, decisions, work habits, and inner peace itself. You become calmer because fewer thoughts gain automatic authority. You become wiser because emotions are examined instead of worshipped. You become more stable because your state of mind no longer changes with every passing impulse. Many people spend their entire lives believing they are powerless against their own thoughts. They say, "This is simply who I am," while continuing to obey every mental habit without challenge. But your mind can be trained, your judgments can be corrected, your impulses can be restrained, not through forceful suppression, but through disciplined awareness guided by reason. You already possess the ability to pause. You already possess the ability to observe. You already possess the ability to choose whether a thought deserves belief or rejection. Use that ability deliberately. The next time emotion rises strongly within you, do not rush toward expression. Stop. Observe carefully. Separate the feeling from the judgment producing it. Ask whether acting on this impulse would strengthen your character or weaken it. Then choose according to reason rather than emotional urgency. This is how self-governance begins, quietly, moment by moment, thought by thought, until the mind no longer rules you through impulse, but serves you through disciplined judgment. Number 4. Govern your desires through reason instead of temporary pleasure. Your desires have been making decisions long before your reason arrives to examine them. That is why you keep reaching the end of certain days feeling empty even after getting exactly what you wanted in the moment. You obeyed the urge, you satisfied the craving, you escaped discomfort temporarily. Yet afterward your mind became heavier instead of clearer, because pleasure without discipline never leaves a person stronger. Look carefully at the pattern repeated throughout your life. A desire appears and immediately it presents itself as necessary. The mind says, "You need this comfort now. You need this distraction now. You need this approval now. You need this indulgence now." Then once you obey the impulse, another desire quickly replaces it. Satisfaction fades almost immediately, and restlessness returns demanding something else. This is how an undisciplined life becomes endless dependence. A person ruled by desire never reaches stability because appetite has no natural limit when reason stops governing it. One pleasure creates hunger for another. One comfort weakens tolerance for difficulty. One indulgence makes future restraint feel harder. The mind gradually loses its ability to remain content without constant stimulation. Then silence begins to feel unbearable. Simplicity begins to feel empty. Restraint begins to feel like punishment. You were not born needing endless pleasure. You trained yourself into dependence through repeated obedience to unnecessary desires. The problem is not that pleasure exists. The problem is that you have allowed temporary satisfaction to become more important than the condition of your character. You keep asking what feels good right now instead of asking what strengthens the mind long term. That question changes everything. Many of your worst decisions were not made because you lacked intelligence. They were made because desire spoke louder than reason in the moment. You knew excess would weaken you, yet you chose it. You knew distraction would waste your time, yet you followed it. You knew temporary relief would create future regret, yet you surrendered anyway. Then afterward you blamed circumstances while ignoring the real cause, which was the failure to govern desire properly. Desire always promises immediate reward while hiding the future cost behind emotional urgency. This is why you must learn to slow down before obeying any strong craving. Whether the craving is for pleasure, attention, comfort, revenge, or escape, the process is the same. The impulse arrives quickly and demands action before examination can occur. Your task is to interrupt that speed. When desire appears, do not immediately ask how to satisfy it. Ask what will happen to your mind if this desire becomes your master repeatedly. Ask whether obeying it will increase self-respect or weaken it. Ask whether the impulse is aligned with reason or merely chasing temporary relief. A disciplined person does not measure choices by immediate emotional satisfaction. He measures them by whether they strengthen or damage his character. You keep suffering because your desires are directing your life toward short-term comfort instead of inner freedom. Look honestly at how often your actions are motivated by avoiding discomfort. You reach for distraction because stillness forces self-examination. You seek constant entertainment because silence reveals unresolved thoughts. You pursue endless consumption because moderation feels emotionally uncomfortable. But discomfort itself is not the enemy. The inability to endure discomfort calmly is the real weakness. A person who cannot tolerate temporary unease becomes easy to control by impulse. The moment boredom appears, he reaches for stimulation. The moment stress appears, he seeks escape. The moment loneliness appears, he searches desperately for external relief instead of governing his own inner condition. This creates emotional dependence on external pleasures that can never fully satisfy the deeper disorder within the mind. You keep trying to calm inner instability through external gratification. But no amount of pleasure can repair a mind lacking discipline. Temporary enjoyment may distract you briefly, but it cannot produce lasting steadiness when your desires remain ungoverned. Peace requires order within the ruling part of the mind. That order begins when reason becomes stronger than appetite. Right now, many of your desires operate automatically because they have been strengthened through repetition. The body wants comfort at the first sign of effort. The mind wants praise at the first sign of insecurity. The emotions want escape at the first sign of pain. You have practiced obedience to craving for so long that resistance now feels unnatural. Good. That feeling reveals where training is needed most. A weak desire becomes stronger when obeyed repeatedly. A strong desire becomes weaker when examined and restrained consistently. This is why self-command cannot remain theoretical. It must become daily practice inside ordinary moments. When you want to avoid necessary work, remain with the task a little longer. When you want unnecessary excess, practice stopping before satisfaction turns into indulgence. When you crave constant stimulation, spend time in deliberate silence instead. These acts retrain the relationship between desire and action. Your mind must learn that not every urge deserves fulfillment. You already know the exhaustion created by endless wanting. Desire keeps telling you that the next pleasure, the next achievement, the next approval, or the next possession will finally settle your mind. Yet, even after obtaining what you chased, restlessness soon returns because desire itself was never disciplined. An uncontrolled appetite expands continuously. This is why people surrounded by comfort often remain internally dissatisfied. Their external pleasures increased while their inner mastery weakened. They became servants to preference. They lost the ability to remain stable when denied what they wanted. True strength appears when a person can remain composed without constant gratification. You must stop confusing freedom with unlimited indulgence. A person addicted to pleasure is not free. He becomes dependent on external conditions for emotional stability. If comfort disappears, his peace disappears with it. If pleasure becomes unavailable, agitation immediately rises. That is captivity disguised as enjoyment. Freedom belongs to the person capable of governing himself, whether pleasure is present or absent. You should be able to enjoy what is reasonable without becoming emotionally chained to it. Eat without greed, rest without laziness, use possessions without building your identity around them. Experience pleasure without surrendering authority over yourself. The disciplined mind remains larger than its desires. This requires honest self-observation because desire often disguises itself as necessity. You tell yourself you deserve excess because the day felt difficult. You tell yourself distraction is harmless because responsibility feels heavy. You tell yourself emotional indulgence is justified because someone disappointed you. Watch how quickly the mind creates arguments to protect its favorite weaknesses. Reason does not speak with emotional urgency. It speaks calmly. It asks whether your actions align with the person you claim you want to become. A person cannot build a noble character while continuously obeying low impulses. Every time you choose temporary pleasure over rational action, you reinforce internal division. One part of you knows what should be done, while another part keeps demanding easier alternatives. This creates quiet self-contempt because your actions repeatedly betray your deeper judgment. You feel this conflict clearly after moments of indulgence. The pleasure fades quickly, but the awareness of weakened discipline remains. The mind recognizes when it has abandoned self-command for comfort. Do not ignore that recognition. That discomfort is useful because it points toward the difference between momentary satisfaction and lasting dignity. A disciplined person learns to value inner respect more than immediate pleasure. He understands that certain desires leave the mind smaller after obeying them. They weaken attention, weaken restraint, weaken clarity, and weaken courage. Not every enjoyable thing damages character, but every uncontrolled appetite eventually does. The question is not whether pleasure exists. The question is whether reason remains in command while pleasure exists. You must practice voluntary restraint regularly, even when indulgence is available. Not because deprivation itself is virtuous, but because restraint strengthens freedom from dependency. Occasionally deny yourself unnecessary comfort deliberately. Eat more simply sometimes. Spend time away from stimulation. Practice contentment without constant consumption. This reminds the mind that peace does not require endless gratification. The person who needs little becomes difficult to disturb. Notice how desire distorts perception. When craving becomes intense, reason begins shrinking consequences. The mind says this one indulgence does not matter, this one distraction is harmless, this one compromise can be justified. But character changes gradually through repeated exceptions. A person rarely destroys self-command through one dramatic decision. More often, he weakens it slowly through countless small permissions granted to impulse. That is why vigilance matters in ordinary moments. You are shaping your future mind through present habits. If desire governs today, it will demand greater authority tomorrow. If reason governs today, discipline becomes easier tomorrow. Every repeated action strengthens one side of your nature. Do not trust every emotional craving simply because it feels strong. Desire can become intense without becoming wise. Some impulses seek comfort while quietly damaging the soul underneath. Some pleasures appear harmless while steadily weakening self-respect through dependency. A disciplined person asks not only what he wants, but why he wants it. Many desires are attempts to escape inner discomfort rather than genuine needs. You seek distraction because you fear stillness. You seek praise because you fear inadequacy. You seek constant stimulation because your mind struggles to remain peaceful alone. No external pleasure can permanently solve an internal disorder left unexamined. You must become capable of sitting quietly with yourself without immediately searching for escape. This is a major test of inner freedom. A person unable to tolerate his own company without distraction remains governed by appetite. Spend time each day in intentional stillness. Let the mind settle enough for hidden impulses to become visible. Observe what cravings repeatedly arise. Observe what emotional states trigger unnecessary desire. Observe where your discipline weakens most easily. Awareness exposes patterns that unconscious living keeps hidden. Your mornings should begin with deliberate direction rather than immediate indulgence. Before the world reaches your attention, remind yourself what actually matters. Remind yourself that virtue matters more than pleasure. Remind yourself that self-command matters more than comfort. Remind yourself that temporary urges do not deserve automatic obedience. Enter the day prepared to govern yourself instead of being carried by impulse. Throughout the day, pause before satisfying unnecessary desires. Not every craving requires suppression, but every craving deserves examination. Learn the difference between healthy enjoyment and emotional dependency. One leaves the mind balanced, the other leaves it restless and demanding more. At night, review your conduct honestly. Ask where desire controlled your choices. Ask where comfort became more important than discipline. Ask where temporary pleasure weakened long-term clarity. Then ask where restraint strengthened your self-respect. This nightly examination gradually sharpens judgment because repeated reflection exposes the true consequences of indulgence. You are not meant to live as a servant to appetite. You possess the ability to choose according to reason, even when desire pressures you toward easier paths. That ability becomes stronger through practice. The disciplined life does not remove all pleasure from existence. It removes slavery to pleasure. There is great peace in wanting less. There is strength in remaining calm without constant gratification. There is dignity in knowing your choices are guided by reason rather than emotional hunger. A person governed by appetite remains internally unstable because satisfaction never lasts long enough. A person governed by reason develops steadiness because his peace no longer depends on endless consumption. You have already experienced where uncontrolled desire leads: more distraction, more dependency, more inner conflict, more wasted time, more regret disguised as temporary enjoyment. Now experience something different: restraint, clarity, moderation, self-command. The next time desire rises strongly within you, do not rush toward fulfillment. Pause long enough for reason to speak. Examine the impulse carefully. Ask whether obeying it will strengthen your character or slowly weaken it beneath temporary pleasure. Then choose the action that leaves your mind more disciplined afterward. That is the path toward inner freedom, not the destruction of desire, the governance of it through reason. Number 5. Discipline your speech and eliminate useless complaints from life. Your words reveal your mind more clearly than your actions ever could. Long before your behavior changes, your speech exposes the condition of your inner discipline. Every complaint you voice is not just sound leaving your mouth. It is a pattern of thought you have already accepted as truth. and every repeated complaint becomes a deeper reinforcement of weakness disguised as awareness. Listen carefully to how often your speech turns into resistance against reality. Something inconvenient happens and immediately language forms around blame. Something uncomfortable appears and immediately words construct dissatisfaction. Something imperfect occurs and speech rushes to declare how it should not be this way. You speak as though reality owes you adjustment to match your expectations. This is where inner disorder begins to spread outward. A person who cannot govern his speech cannot govern his thinking. And a person who cannot govern his thinking will always feel controlled by life itself. The tongue becomes the outlet of unchecked judgment, and unchecked judgment becomes the foundation of unnecessary suffering. You may believe complaining is harmless because it feels temporary, but every complaint strengthens the mental habit of resistance. The more you repeat dissatisfaction out loud, the more your mind learns to interpret reality as something constantly wrong. You begin to live inside a narrative of constant defect instead of seeing situations clearly as they are. Reality does not become worse because you complain, but your capacity to endure reality becomes weaker. There is a subtle collapse that happens inside the mind of someone who speaks without discipline. At first, speech feels like simple expression. Then it becomes habitual reaction. Then it becomes emotional release. Eventually it becomes identity. A person no longer speaks about problems. He becomes someone who constantly produces problems through interpretation and language. You must see how much of your emotional state is reinforced through your own words. Every complaint is a rehearsal of helplessness. Every expression of blame is a quiet surrender of responsibility. Every unnecessary criticism of external conditions is a withdrawal from the only domain you can actually govern, which is your own judgment and response. Your life does not improve by speaking more about what is wrong. It improves when you reduce unnecessary speech and increase disciplined observation. A strong mind does not feel the need to verbalize every irritation. It does not convert every discomfort into commentary. It does not demand constant validation through shared negativity. It remains focused on what must be done rather than what can be criticized. You have been using speech as a way to discharge discomfort instead of directing action. That habit has trained your mind to prioritize expression over correction. Notice how quickly you speak when something disturbs you. There is almost no pause. The mind jumps from perception to judgment to verbal release without examination. In that gapless reaction, you lose control over your own reasoning. Should follow thought, not replace it. When you speak without examining your judgment first, you multiply confusion instead of clarity. You reinforce emotional interpretation instead of rational understanding. You teach your mind that immediate reaction is acceptable even when reason has not yet been consulted. This is why discipline of speech is discipline of mind. Begin by observing how often your words are unnecessary. Not all observations need to be spoken. Not all frustrations need to be shared. Not all opinions deserve expression. Much of what is spoken in daily life serves no constructive purpose. It only reinforces internal agitation. Silence is not emptiness. Silence is control over unnecessary expression. When you reduce complaint, you increase clarity. When you reduce reactionary speech, you increase self-awareness. When you stop feeding language to every irritation, you begin to see situations more accurately instead of emotionally. Look at how complaints distort perception. A small inconvenience becomes a major problem when repeated in speech. A minor delay becomes a story of injustice when verbally expanded. A simple mistake becomes a narrative of frustration when constantly discussed, amplifies what it describes. If you constantly describe disorder, you strengthen the experience of disorder. If you constantly describe dissatisfaction, you strengthen dissatisfaction. If you constantly describe external blame, you weaken your sense of internal responsibility. The disciplined person understands that words are not neutral. Words shape mental direction. You must begin to treat speech as an act of self-governance rather than emotional release. Before speaking, pause and ask whether the words you are about to release strengthen clarity or weaken it. Ask whether they bring reason forward or simply extend emotional reaction. Most unnecessary speech fails this test. You complain about weather, traffic, delays, people, work, and circumstances beyond your control, as though verbal resistance could alter them. But none of these things change because of complaint. What changes is your own mental condition, and it changes for the worse. A person who speaks without restraint slowly trains himself to believe that expression equals action. But expression is not action. It is only movement of thought into sound. Without discipline, that movement becomes waste. Your energy is drained not only by physical activity but also by uncontrolled verbal activity. Each unnecessary complaint consumes attention that could have been directed toward understanding or correction. You already know the aftermath of careless speech. After speaking in frustration, you often feel regret. After complaining excessively, you feel mentally heavier. After reacting verbally without reflection, you realize the situation did not improve at all. That regret is evidence that your rational mind was bypassed. You are not being asked to suppress truth. You are being asked to remove unnecessary distortion. There is a difference between honest communication and habitual complaint. One serves clarity and responsibility. The other serves emotional release without direction. A disciplined voice speaks only when it contributes to understanding or necessary action. Everything else remains unspoken. This requires training because the habit of complaint is deeply rooted. It often appears disguised as harmless sharing or social connection. But if you examine closely, much of it carries no purpose beyond reinforcing dissatisfaction. You must begin observing your speech throughout the day. Notice how often you speak about what is wrong instead of what is required. Notice how often your words reinforce irritation instead of solving anything. Notice how often you speak without asking whether silence would have been wiser. This awareness alone begins to weaken the habit. At the start of the day, set a clear internal intention regarding your speech. Decide that your words will serve discipline rather than emotional discharge. Decide that you will avoid unnecessary complaint. Decide that you will pause before speaking when irritation arises. This is not suppression, this is direction. During interactions, especially when frustration appears, slow your response. Do not allow immediate verbal reaction. Give yourself space between feeling and speech. In that space, reason can return. If something is truly worth addressing, it can still be addressed after calm thought. But if it is only a passing irritation, it does not deserve expression at all. You will notice that many impulses to complain disappear when given time to breathe. What felt urgent in the moment often reveals itself as unimportant once examined. This is how discipline replaces reaction. You also need to become aware of how complaint affects your relationships. Constant dissatisfaction in speech does not strengthen connection. It spreads emotional heaviness. It trains the mind to focus on negativity rather than constructive engagement. People may begin to avoid those who consistently speak from irritation rather than reason. A disciplined speaker brings stability into conversation. He does not constantly shift emotional tone based on every small disturbance. He speaks with intention, not reflex. Your words should reflect a stable mind, not a reactive one. Throughout the day, practice choosing silence over unnecessary commentary. When something annoys you, resist the urge to immediately express it. When something disappoints you, observe it before speaking. When something feels unfair, Examine it internally before converting it into complaint. This practice gradually weakens emotional reflex and strengthens rational control. At night, review your speech honestly. Ask where you spoke unnecessarily. Ask where complaint replaced clarity. Ask where words were driven by irritation instead of reason. Do not judge yourself harshly. Observe accurately. Correction begins with awareness, not punishment. Over time, you will notice something important. As complaint decreases, mental clarity increases. As unnecessary speech decreases, emotional disturbance decreases. As verbal reaction decreases, inner stability increases. This is because your speech and your mind are not separate systems. They are continuously shaping each other. A disciplined mind produces disciplined speech, and disciplined speech reinforces a disciplined mind. The goal is not silence for its own sake. The goal is control over expression so that every word carries purpose or remains unspoken. When speech becomes intentional, the mind becomes clearer. When speech becomes restrained, emotional turbulence loses reinforcement. You are not required to comment on every inconvenience. You are not required to express every irritation. You are not required to transform every discomfort into spoken dissatisfaction. Much of what disturbs you does not require speech. It requires understanding, acceptance, or disciplined action. Begin choosing accordingly. Let your words become fewer but more deliberate. Let your speech become measured rather than reactive. Let your communication reflect reason rather than complaint. In doing so, you begin to remove one of the most subtle sources of suffering, which is the constant verbal reinforcement of dissatisfaction. Speak less from impulse. Speak more from clarity. And in the space you create through disciplined silence, reason will finally have room to govern your inner life more steadily than ever before. Number 6. Strengthen your character through difficult tasks completed without excuses. You already know what must be done long before you begin doing it. Yet your mind keeps searching for softer conditions before acting. It waits for motivation. It waits for energy. It waits for certainty that never arrives in full measure. Meanwhile, life continues demanding responsibility regardless of how prepared or unprepared you feel. The gap between what you know and what you execute is where your character is being revealed every single day. Every difficult task you delay is silently shaping your identity. Every avoided responsibility is reinforcing hesitation. Every postponed effort is strengthening the habit of resistance. You do not become stronger by understanding discipline. You become stronger by practicing it when the mind resists. Look carefully at how often your internal dialogue attempts to negotiate with effort. A task appears and immediately the mind produces reasons to postpone it. It feels too heavy. It feels inconvenient. It feels unfair. It feels unnecessary in that moment. These judgments are not truths. They are resistance disguised as reasoning. You have trained yourself to obey comfort first and responsibility second. That order must be reversed if you want to regain control over your life. A disciplined person does not wait for conditions to feel favorable. He begins where he stands, with what is available, regardless of internal resistance. The presence of discomfort is not a signal to retreat. It is a signal that growth is being demanded. You keep misinterpreting difficulty as something wrong instead of something necessary. This misunderstanding weakens your entire approach to life. Every time you interpret effort as suffering to avoid, you strengthen avoidance as a default response. Eventually, even small tasks begin to feel heavy because your mind has learned to resist them before attempting them. This is how character erosion happens quietly, not through dramatic failure, but through repeated hesitation. You do not lack ability. You lack consistency in confronting resistance without excuses. Excuses often arrive in subtle forms. You tell yourself you are too tired when you are not exhausted. You tell yourself the timing is not right when no better moment will appear. You tell yourself you will begin later when later always carries the same resistance. These inner justifications are not neutral thoughts. They are habits designed to protect comfort at the cost of strength. Every excuse is a withdrawal from self-command. You must begin observing how quickly excuses appear the moment effort is required. That moment reveals where your discipline is weakest, not in grand crises, but in ordinary decisions that require steady execution without emotional support. Character is not built in ease. It is revealed and strengthened in resistance. When a difficult task appears, your first responsibility is not completion. It is refusal to surrender to avoidance. You must learn to remain with the task even when the mind protests. The presence of discomfort does not invalidate responsibility. It confirms it. A weak mind interprets difficulty as permission to stop. A disciplined mind interprets difficulty as confirmation that action is required. This distinction must become clear inside you. You already know what happens when you consistently avoid effort. Confidence weakens. Respect for yourself declines. Mental clutter increases. Tasks accumulate and begin to feel heavier than they actually are. You become aware of your own avoidance, and that awareness slowly creates internal tension that follows you throughout the day. This tension is not caused by the task itself. It is caused by the refusal to act. When you complete difficult work without excuses, something fundamental shifts inside your mind. Resistance loses authority, self-trust increases, clarity returns. The mind begins to understand that your decisions are final, not negotiable depending on mood. You must train this response repeatedly. Begin with the simplest form of resistance. The moment you notice hesitation, do not allow negotiation. Do not ask whether you feel ready. Do not wait for motivation to appear. Start the action while discomfort is still present. This is where discipline is formed. A task started under resistance carries more value than a task started under motivation. Motivation fluctuates. Discipline remains. Your life has been shaped too often by emotional readiness. When energy is high, you act. When energy is low, you delay. This creates inconsistency that weakens identity. A stable character does not depend on internal weather. It depends on principles applied regardless of feeling. You must begin separating action from emotional approval. Not every action will feel good at the beginning. Not every task will inspire enthusiasm. Not every responsibility will feel meaningful before execution. Yet they still require completion. The disciplined mind does not require emotional permission to act. Look honestly at how avoidance has affected your life. Tasks left undone accumulate mentally even when physically absent. The mind continues tracking them in the background. You feel burdened not only by what you are doing, but also by what you are avoiding. This creates constant low-level stress that weakens attention across all areas of life. Completion removes this burden. Every time you finish something difficult without excuse, mental space is restored. The mind becomes lighter, not because life has become easier, but because internal resistance has been removed. This is why discipline creates peace, not external comfort, but internal order. You must also observe how excuses distort self-perception. Each time you justify avoidance, you reinforce a narrative that you are someone who cannot act under difficulty. That narrative becomes self-fulfilling. You begin to believe effort requires perfect conditions, and therefore you wait longer before acting, which strengthens inactivity further. This cycle must be broken through immediate action, not reflection alone. Reflection without execution only deepens awareness of weakness. Execution transforms awareness into strength. The practice begins with acceptance that discomfort will be present in almost every meaningful task. You are not meant to eliminate discomfort before acting. You are meant to act despite it. This is where character is tested and built simultaneously. When resistance appears, do not argue with it, observe it and proceed anyway. The mind will attempt to slow you down with thoughts about difficulty or inconvenience. Let those thoughts exist without obeying them. Thoughts are not commands, they are only impressions. Your authority begins when you stop obeying every impression automatically. Throughout the day, return attention repeatedly to the task in front of you. Avoid drifting into imagined difficulty or anticipated fatigue. Stay with present action. The mind tends to exaggerate effort when it is not engaged in doing. Once action begins, resistance often decreases on its own. This reveals an important truth. Much of what you fear about effort exists only before action, not during it. At the beginning of each day, set a clear intention that excuses will not govern your behavior. This intention is not emotional motivation, it is rational direction. Remind yourself that discomfort is expected and does not require avoidance. Remind yourself that effort is part of the structure of a meaningful life. Enter the day prepared to act without negotiation. When difficult tasks arise, do not break them into justification. Break them into steps and begin the first step immediately. The mind often becomes overwhelmed not by complexity but by imagined resistance. Once movement begins, clarity follows. Avoid giving attention to the feeling that says wait. That feeling is the voice of preservation, not progress. You must become familiar with acting before emotional readiness appears. This is the core of self-mastery. Waiting for perfect conditions keeps you dependent on conditions. Acting under imperfect conditions builds independence from them. There will be moments when you fail to act. Do not use those moments as proof of incapacity. Use them as signals for correction. The disciplined life is not defined by perfection but by continuous return to responsibility after deviation. What matters is not whether resistance appears, it always will. What matters is whether resistance governs your decisions. At night, review your actions with honesty. Identify where excuses influenced behavior. Identify where hesitation replaced execution. Identify where discomfort was treated as justification for avoidance. Do not exaggerate failure and do not ignore it. Observe it clearly so correction becomes possible. Over time, something important begins to change. Tasks that once felt heavy become manageable because your mind stops inflating resistance before action. Confidence is no longer based on feeling capable. It is based on evidence created through repeated execution. You begin to trust yourself because you consistently act despite discomfort. That trust is the foundation of real strength. Not the absence of difficulty, but the proven ability to act within it. A life governed by excuses is a life continuously postponed. A life governed by disciplined action is a life continuously built. Every moment you choose execution over avoidance, you strengthen the structure of your character. The path forward is not complicated. It is direct. See the task, refuse the excuse, begin anyway, and continue until completion, regardless of internal resistance. In doing so, you stop being someone who reacts to difficulty and become someone who is shaped by it into something stronger than before. Number 7. Examine your daily choices and correct harmful patterns immediately. Your life is not shaped by rare dramatic moments, but by the small repeated choices you make without noticing. Each day you decide how to think, how to respond, how to spend attention, and how to treat responsibility. These choices accumulate quietly until they form the structure of your character. Yet you often move through them without examination, as if they carry no consequence. This is where your real condition is revealed. You are not suffering only from external events. you are suffering from patterns of choice you have never fully observed. The mind repeats familiar reactions because it has not been trained to question itself. The same avoidance appears, the same distraction appears, the same emotional responses appear, and because they are familiar, you accept them as part of who you are, instead of seeing them as habits that can be corrected. A life without examination becomes a life directed by unconscious repetition. Every time you react without awareness, you strengthen that reaction. Every time you delay reflection, you reinforce confusion. Every time you allow a harmful pattern to continue without interruption, you give it authority over future decisions. Over time, these patterns become so familiar that you no longer recognize them as choices. They begin to feel like identity. But identity is not fixed. It is formed through repeated decisions, either examined or ignored. You must begin to see your daily life as a continuous stream of small judgments. Each judgment carries direction. Some move you toward clarity, others move you toward disorder. The difference is not always obvious in the moment because harmful patterns often feel comfortable while they are unfolding. This is why examination is necessary. Without examination, you remain reactive. With examination, you become aware. And with awareness, you gain the ability to correct what is forming before it becomes deeply rooted. Most people only reflect on their behavior after consequences appear. They wait until damage is visible before considering whether their choices were aligned with reason. But by then, the pattern has already strengthened. Real discipline requires earlier attention at the level where decisions are still forming. You must learn to observe yourself while living, not only after the fact. Throughout the day, your mind makes countless small interpretations. Someone speaks and you assign meaning. A situation unfolds and you assign judgment. A delay occurs and you assign frustration. A success occurs and you assign pride. These interpretations happen so quickly that they feel automatic, but they are not beyond your control. They simply occur faster than your awareness. Training begins by slowing this process internally. When something happens, do not immediately accept the first interpretation that appears. Notice it first. Observe it as a mental event rather than truth. Ask whether it is accurate or merely habitual. Many of your interpretations are not grounded in reason but in emotional repetition. You have been reinforcing certain ways of seeing the world for years without questioning them. This is why harmful patterns persist. They are not challenged at the moment of appearance. Correction must happen immediately when awareness arises, not later, not tomorrow, not after consequences grow. The moment you recognize a harmful pattern, you must interrupt it internally. If you notice irritation forming, you must observe it before it turns into reaction. If you notice avoidance forming, you must see it before it becomes delay. If you notice judgment forming, you must examine it before it becomes belief. This interruption is where transformation begins. A disciplined mind does not allow harmful patterns to complete themselves unchecked. It catches them early while they are still flexible. Once a pattern becomes action, it is harder to correct. But when it is still only a thought or impulse, it can be redirected. You already possess this capacity. You simply do not use it consistently. Your suffering often continues not because you lack understanding, but because you fail to intervene at the right moment. You notice your behavior too late and then feel regret instead of correction, but regret without earlier awareness only repeats the cycle. You must shift from delayed awareness to immediate awareness. Begin observing how your day unfolds in real time. Notice when attention drifts into distraction. Notice when judgment becomes harsh without reason. Notice when emotional interpretation replaces clear thinking. These are the exact points where your patterns either strengthen or weaken. Do not judge yourself harshly for noticing them. Judgment is not the goal. Correction is. A clear mind sees patterns without distortion. It does not exaggerate failure nor ignore it. It simply recognizes what is happening and adjusts accordingly. This ability must be trained through repetition. At the beginning of the day, set an intention to observe your choices as they occur, not as a memory afterward, but as living events while they are happening. This creates a layer of awareness above automatic behavior. You are no longer fully inside reaction. You are observing reaction forming. This shift changes everything. When you begin observing yourself honestly, you will notice how often your mind tries to justify harmful patterns instead of correcting them. The mind will say, "This is harmless. This can wait. This does not matter. This is just who I am." These justifications are attempts to protect existing habits from examination. Do not accept them immediately. Pause and examine them instead. Ask whether the justification aligns with reason or merely protects comfort. Many patterns continue not because they are useful, but because they are familiar. Familiarity is not truth. You must become willing to disrupt familiarity when it leads to harm. Throughout the day, you will encounter repeated opportunities to correct yourself. These opportunities are not dramatic. They appear in small moments. A slight emotional reaction, a small distraction, a minor avoidance, a subtle judgment. These are the points where character is either strengthened or weakened. Most people ignore these moments because they seem insignificant. But a life is not shaped by major decisions alone. It is shaped by how small decisions are handled when no one is watching. When you catch a harmful pattern early, correction must be immediate, not delayed through excuses or rationalization. The longer you wait, the more the pattern settles into behavior. For example, if you notice yourself avoiding a task, you must not allow the avoidance to continue unchecked. If you notice yourself reacting emotionally, you must not allow the reaction to expand into speech or action. If you notice your mind drifting into judgment, you must pause and return to clarity. This is discipline in real time. It is not theoretical reflection. It is active correction. At first, this will feel difficult because you are breaking long-established habits of automatic living. But difficulty is not a sign of failure. It is a sign that awareness is entering territory previously governed by impulse. You must be patient with the process while remaining firm in execution. Over time, as you practice immediate correction, something important begins to change. The gaps between awareness and action become shorter. Harmful patterns are interrupted earlier. Emotional reactions lose intensity because they are no longer allowed to expand unchecked. You begin to feel more present within your own life, not because circumstances have changed, but because your relationship with your choices has changed. At night, you must review the day with honesty, not to criticize yourself, but to see clearly where patterns were corrected and where they were ignored. Ask where awareness appeared too late. Ask where reaction was not interrupted. Ask where judgment was accepted without examination. This reflection is not about guilt. It is about precision. A person who examines his daily choices carefully begins to see the structure of his own mind. He recognizes which patterns dominate him and which moments offer opportunities for change. He no longer lives blindly within habit. He begins to live consciously within choice. Over time, you will notice that harmful patterns weaken not through force, but through consistent interruption. They lose strength because they are no longer allowed to operate unnoticed. This is how transformation happens, not through sudden change, but through continuous correction. You must also understand that external events will continue to trigger reactions. That will not stop. What changes is your response time. The disciplined mind shortens the gap between stimulus and awareness. That gap becomes the space where freedom exists. Within that space, you either repeat old patterns or choose new ones. Your future is shaped in that space. Begin treating each day as an opportunity to observe and correct. Do not wait for major breakdowns or major insights. Use ordinary moments. They contain everything necessary for transformation. A life governed by unconscious patterns feels chaotic. A life governed by examined choices becomes steady. Not because difficulty disappears, but because reaction no longer controls direction. You are not powerless within your habits. You are simply untrained in observing them closely enough to interrupt them. That training begins now, not later. Now. Number 8. End your dependence on praise and respect your own judgment. Your mind becomes unstable the moment you begin outsourcing your self-worth to the opinions of others. You may not notice it at first, but every time you adjust your behavior to gain approval or avoid criticism, you are surrendering authority over your own judgment. Little by little, your decisions stop being guided by reason and start being shaped by imagined observers who are not living your life and will not carry the consequences of your choices. This dependence on praise creates a hidden form of inner weakness. You begin to evaluate yourself through external reactions rather than internal clarity. A compliment lifts you temporarily. A criticism disturbs you deeply. Silence from others creates doubt. Approval becomes oxygen for confidence, and disapproval becomes a threat to stability. In this condition, your emotional state is no longer under your control. You are not living according to your understanding of what is right. You are living according to what you believe will be accepted. This is why your mind feels divided. One part of you knows what is reasonable, what is disciplined, what is correct. Another part of you constantly asks how it will appear to others. That second voice grows stronger every time you choose appearance over integrity. Over time, you begin to distrust your own judgment simply because you have not practiced standing firmly behind it. A life built on approval cannot produce inner stability. It can only produce dependence. Look carefully at how often you hesitate before acting, not because you doubt the action itself, but because you imagine how it might be perceived. You edit your speech, soften your truth, delay your decisions, or adjust your behavior to avoid disapproval. Each adjustment may seem small, but together they form a pattern where your life is subtly directed by external expectations rather than internal reasoning. You begin to live as though you are constantly being evaluated, and in doing so, you become disconnected from your own moral clarity. This is not strength. It is quiet surrender. The judgment of others is not something you can control. People will interpret you differently depending on their own biases, moods, and perspectives. If you build your identity on their reactions, you are placing your stability in something unstable. You are trusting a shifting mirror to define your reflection. The result is constant anxiety. You attempt to maintain approval from multiple directions that will never fully align. Even when you succeed in pleasing one group, another remains dissatisfied. Even when praise is given, it does not last. You become dependent on an endless cycle of external validation that can never provide lasting peace. You must understand clearly that praise is not a measure of truth. It is a reflection of perception, and perception is not always aligned with reason. If you allow perception to guide your life more than your own rational judgment, you will lose consistency in character. You will begin to act differently depending on who is watching. You will shape your behavior to fit expectations rather than principles. This creates internal fragmentation where no stable identity can form. A disciplined mind does not reject all feedback. It simply refuses to be governed by it. There is a difference between considering input and depending on approval. One is rational evaluation, the other is emotional submission. You must begin to return authority to your own judgment. Not in arrogance, but in responsibility. You are the one who must live with your decisions. You are the one who experiences their consequences. Therefore, your primary reference point must be your own reasoned understanding of what is right. Begin observing how often you adjust yourself for the sake of approval. Notice when you soften your truth to avoid disagreement. Notice when you choose silence not out of wisdom, but out of fear of judgment. Notice when you act not because you believe it is correct, but because you believe it will be liked. These are the exact moments where your dependence is revealed. Each time you act from approval-seeking, you weaken trust in your own judgment. Each time you choose principle over perception, you strengthen it. You must train yourself to tolerate disapproval without internal collapse. The discomfort of being misunderstood is not a danger to your character. It is a test of it. If your sense of right and wrong depends on external agreement, then your reasoning is not yet stable. A strong mind evaluates actions based on whether they align with virtue, clarity, and rational judgment, not on whether they generate approval. At the beginning of this practice, you will feel resistance. The mind will say that rejection feels unsafe, that criticism must be avoided, that acceptance is necessary for peace. But this is conditioning, not truth. These reactions arise from years of training in external validation. You must untrain this dependence through consistent action. Start with small situations. Speak honestly even when approval is uncertain. Make decisions based on what you have determined to be right, rather than what is most likely to be liked. Allow moments of disagreement to exist without immediate correction for the sake of comfort. Do not interpret discomfort as failure. Interpret it as the beginning of independence. Each time you withstand the urge to seek approval, you reclaim a portion of your inner authority. Each time you act according to your own judgment despite external uncertainty, you reinforce self-trust. Over time, your decisions become less reactive to social pressure and more aligned with reason. You will begin to notice something important. When approval is no longer your goal, clarity increases. When praise is no longer your measure, honesty becomes easier. When criticism no longer destabilizes you, your mind becomes more steady. This is because you are no longer dividing your attention between truth and perception. You are focusing on what is correct rather than what is received. A person dependent on praise is always adjusting himself to fit external expectations. A person governed by reason adjusts himself only when he recognizes error in his own judgment. That difference determines whether a life is stable or constantly shifting. You must also become aware of how internal dialogue changes when approval is no longer the center of your attention. Instead of asking, "How will this be seen?" you begin asking, "Is this right?" Instead of asking, "Will they accept this?" you begin asking, "Does this align with reason?" This shift restructures decision-making at its foundation. It removes the audience from your mind. At the start of each day, set a clear intention that your actions will be guided by judgment, not approval. Remind yourself that external opinions are outside your control. You cannot control whether others understand you, agree with you, or approve of you. That domain does not belong to you. What belongs to you is your ability to reason clearly and act accordingly. Throughout the day, observe moments when approval-seeking arises. When you notice it, pause internally. Do not immediately act from it. Let it be visible in your awareness without obedience. Then choose based on reason rather than reaction. This practice slowly weakens the reflex to seek validation. At night, examine your choices honestly. Ask where you acted from fear of judgment instead of clarity. Ask where you adjusted your behavior unnecessarily for the sake of acceptance. Ask where you abandoned your own reasoning in favor of external approval. Do not judge yourself harshly. Observe precisely. Correction requires awareness, not punishment. Over time, you will begin to feel less emotional turbulence when others approve or disapprove of you. Praise will no longer elevate you excessively. Criticism will no longer destabilize you deeply. You will remain centered because your foundation is no longer external. It is internal, rooted in reason, rooted in self-examination, rooted in the understanding that your responsibility is to act correctly, not to be universally approved. This shift is subtle but transformative. You stop performing for acceptance and start living according to principle. You stop chasing validation and start practicing judgment. You stop depending on external voices and start trusting internal clarity. That is where freedom begins, not in being liked by everyone, but in no longer needing to be. Number 9. Prepare your mind calmly for pain, loss, and uncertainty. You move through your days as if stability is the natural state of life, yet every experience around you contradicts that assumption. Nothing remains fixed. People change, circumstances shift, health fluctuates, possessions are lost, relationships evolve or dissolve. Even your own thoughts refuse to stay still for long. Still, your mind behaves as if permanence is guaranteed, and that false assumption is the root of much of your suffering. When loss appears, you are not only disturbed by what happened, you are disturbed by the fact that you never prepared for it. When pain arrives, you are not only affected by the experience, you are shocked that discomfort was possible. When uncertainty arises, your mind reacts as though it was a mistake in the structure of life itself, rather than a natural condition of existence. This is where inner instability begins. You are not suffering simply because difficult events occur. You are suffering because your expectations have not been trained to include them. A mind that expects only ease collapses when difficulty appears. A mind that expects only certainty becomes anxious when uncertainty arrives. A mind that expects only gain becomes devastated when loss takes place. Your emotional reactions are often not responses to reality itself, but to the gap between reality and your assumptions about how reality should behave. This gap is where most unnecessary suffering is created. You cannot control whether loss will appear in your life. You cannot control whether pain will touch your body or your emotions. You cannot control whether uncertainty will surround future outcomes. These belong to the natural unfolding of events outside your authority. But you can control how prepared your mind is when they arrive. Preparation is not pessimism, it is clarity. It is the removal of surprise from what is already part of existence. A prepared mind does not wait for suffering to occur before recognizing its possibility. It accepts in advance that life contains instability, and therefore it does not build its peace on conditions that cannot remain permanent. You weaken yourself every time you assume that current stability guarantees future stability. That assumption leads to shock when change inevitably comes, and shock intensifies suffering far more than the event itself. A disciplined mind trains itself to remain steady even when conditions shift. It does not build emotional dependence on outcomes that are not guaranteed. Instead, it recognizes the difference between what can be influenced and what cannot. Your actions, judgments, and responses belong to you. Everything external does not. The more you attach your peace to external stability, the more vulnerable you become to disturbance. Begin observing how often your anxiety is rooted not in present reality, but in imagined loss or future uncertainty. The mind constantly rehearses scenarios of discomfort, failure, or absence, yet these are only projections, not present facts. By treating them as immediate threats, you create suffering before anything has actually occurred. You are experiencing the pain of imagined instability rather than actual events. This habit must be examined carefully. Not all thinking is useful thinking. Many thoughts are simply rehearsals of fear, attachment, and resistance to natural change. When you believe every thought requires emotional response, you weaken your ability to remain grounded in the present moment. A prepared mind distinguishes between possibility and reality. It does not react to every imagined outcome. It remains anchored in what is actually occurring while acknowledging that change is always possible. To prepare for loss is not to invite fear, it is to reduce the shock that arises when change inevitably happens. When you accept in advance that nothing external is fully within your control, you remove the illusion that stability is guaranteed. And when illusion is removed, fear loses much of its power. You must begin training your mind to recognize impermanence without emotional collapse. Everything you rely on externally is subject to change. This is not a threat, it is the structure of life itself. The problem arises only when you expect permanence where none exists. A person who understands this does not cling tightly to conditions. He engages fully with life, while recognizing that nothing external is fully owned or secured. This awareness creates a calm form of readiness, not fear, not anxiety, but steady acceptance of reality as it is. When pain arrives, you are not required to interpret it as injustice. Pain is a signal, an experience, a condition that arises and passes. Your judgment about pain determines whether it becomes overwhelming or manageable. If you label it as unbearable or unfair, you intensify it mentally beyond its physical or emotional presence. Much of suffering is created by resistance to what is already happening. Uncertainty operates in the same way. The mind wants complete prediction and control over future events. When it cannot obtain certainty, it produces anxiety to simulate control through worry. But worry does not create control, it only drains attention from the present moment. A disciplined mind accepts that uncertainty is permanent in external affairs. You can prepare, plan, and act with reason, but you cannot eliminate unpredictability. Once this is accepted calmly rather than resisted emotionally, uncertainty loses its capacity to destabilize you. You are not meant to eliminate instability from life. You are meant to strengthen your mind within it. Begin practicing mental preparation daily. In the morning, remind yourself that the day may contain discomfort, delay, disappointment, or change. Do not say this to create fear, but to remove surprise. When the mind is not surprised by difficulty, it reacts with greater stability when difficulty appears. You can also practice imagining small forms of loss or inconvenience intentionally, not to distress yourself, but to train emotional flexibility. When you mentally acknowledge that things may not go as expected, you reduce the shock response when they do not. This practice strengthens resilience by expanding mental acceptance of reality's variability. Throughout the day, observe how you respond to small disruptions: a delay, a misunderstanding, a discomfort, a moment of loss of control. These minor events are training grounds for larger challenges. Each reaction reveals how much your mind still depends on conditions remaining favorable. When disturbance arises, pause internally. Separate the event from your interpretation of it. The event is neutral in itself. Your judgment gives it emotional weight. By adjusting your interpretation, you adjust your experience. At night, reflect on where resistance to change appeared. Ask where expectations did not match reality. Ask where emotional reactions were intensified by surprise rather than by the event itself. This reflection builds awareness of how often suffering is created internally rather than externally. Over time, you will notice that prepared thinking reduces emotional volatility. Events still occur, but they no longer strike the mind with the same force. You remain more centered because you are no longer building your peace on fragile assumptions of permanence. You begin to understand that stability is not found in controlling outcomes, but in strengthening judgment. A mind trained in preparation does not fear loss because it has already accepted the possibility of absence. It does not fear pain because it understands pain as a natural condition that can be endured. It does not fear uncertainty because it no longer demands complete control over what cannot be controlled. Instead of resisting reality, it meets reality with readiness. This readiness is not emotional hardness, it is clarity. It is the absence of surprise. It is the steady recognition that life unfolds according to conditions beyond full control, and the only stable domain is your own reasoning and response. When you accept this fully, your relationship with life changes. You stop demanding permanence from impermanent things. You stop expecting certainty from uncertain conditions. You stop reacting as though change is a violation rather than a constant feature of existence. What remains is your ability to respond with reason. That is your true domain. Everything else will change. And in that recognition, your mind becomes calm, not because life is predictable, but because you are no longer dependent on it being predictable to remain steady. Number 10. Dedicate your remaining life entirely toward virtue and self-mastery. You are not as far from the end of your life as your mind likes to assume. Time does not announce itself before it passes. It only reveals itself after it has already moved beyond your control. And yet you continue living as though there will always be an undefined later moment when discipline becomes easier, when clarity becomes natural, when self-mastery becomes convenient. That imagined later moment is one of the most dangerous illusions you carry. Because every day you delay living according to reason, you strengthen habits that pull you further away from it. Every time you choose impulse over principle, you reinforce instability. Every time you postpone self-examination, you allow confusion to deepen. You are not standing still. You are being shaped continuously by what you repeat. Now the only question that remains is whether you will continue drifting through reaction or begin living deliberately with full awareness of what truly matters. Virtue is not an abstract idea reserved for contemplation. It is the quality of mind that governs how you think, how you respond, how you choose, and how you endure. It is present in your judgments when they are honest. It is present in your actions when they are deliberate. It is present in your restraint when impulse tries to take control. Without it, everything else becomes unstable, no matter how externally successful your life appears. You already know what it feels like to act without alignment. You experience it in regret after impulsive decisions. You feel it in internal discomfort after reacting without awareness. You notice it in the quiet dissatisfaction that follows choices made for convenience rather than clarity. That discomfort is not random. It is the mind recognizing deviation from reason. You are not suffering because life lacks meaning. You are suffering because you are not consistently living in accordance with what your own reason already recognizes as right. Self-mastery is not something added to life later. It is the foundation of living without inner division. A mind without mastery is divided between what it knows and what it does. It understands discipline yet obeys impulse. It recognizes truth yet follows habit. It sees clearly yet acts blindly. That division is the source of inner instability. The purpose of this moment is to remove that division. You must begin to see every day as an opportunity to return to governance over yourself. Not governance over external conditions, not control over how others behave, but complete responsibility over your own judgments and responses. That is the only domain that belongs fully to you. Yet you often abandon this domain without noticing. You allow emotion to choose reactions before reason is consulted. You allow distraction to guide attention before intention is set. You allow external pressure to shape behavior before internal clarity is affirmed. Each abandonment weakens self-trust, and without self-trust, even simple decisions begin to feel heavier than they are. The examined life is not a philosophical luxury. It is a necessity for anyone who wishes to live without being governed by unconscious habits, Without examination, you repeat patterns without awareness. With examination, you begin to see the structure behind your choices. You recognize that much of what you call personality is actually repetition. Repetition can be corrected, but only if it is first seen clearly. Begin observing how your mind reacts in ordinary moments, not only in major events, but in small interactions where impulse usually goes unchecked. Notice how quickly judgment forms. Notice how often reaction precedes reflection. Notice how frequently you act before understanding your own motivation. These small moments are where your life is actually being decided. You are not defined by rare achievements or failures. You are defined by how you conduct yourself repeatedly when no one is forcing awareness upon you. This is why discipline must become internal rather than external. No one will consistently remind you to examine your thinking. No one will interrupt your emotional reactions for you. No one will pause your impulses before they become actions. That responsibility belongs entirely to you. At the beginning of each day, you must set a clear internal direction, not in vague intention, but in conscious commitment. You will govern your judgments. You will question impulsive reactions. You will act in alignment with reason rather than convenience. This is not motivational speech. It is structural alignment for how you will engage with reality. Throughout the day, your attention must return repeatedly to this standard. When irritation appears, observe it before expressing it. When desire appears, examine it before obeying it. When avoidance appears, confront it before it becomes delay. This is how discipline is built in real time. Each interruption of impulse strengthens clarity. Each moment of awareness strengthens self-mastery. You will notice resistance when you begin this practice. The mind prefers automatic behavior because it requires less effort. It prefers reaction because it avoids examination. But ease is not the measure of what is correct. Ease often strengthens weakness, while effort strengthens character. You must be willing to experience temporary discomfort in order to restore long-term order. The mind that avoids discipline in pursuit of comfort eventually becomes uncomfortable within itself. Virtue is not something that appears through occasional reflection. It appears through repeated alignment of thought and action. When your understanding of what is right matches your behavior consistently, inner conflict decreases. When your actions repeatedly contradict what you know to be right, inner conflict increases. That conflict is not punishment, it is feedback. It is the mind signaling that direction must be corrected. Self-mastery requires you to treat this feedback seriously, not emotionally but rationally, not with shame but with adjustment. You are not meant to remain fixed in error once it is recognized. You are meant to correct course immediately. Every moment provides an opportunity to do so. When you notice misalignment, do not delay correction. Do not justify continuation of the pattern. Do not wait for motivation to shift behavior. Shift behavior directly through conscious choice. This is how transformation becomes continuous rather than occasional. As you practice this, you begin to see that freedom is not found in doing whatever you feel like doing. That leads only to repetition of impulse. True freedom is found in the ability to act according to reason, even when impulse pulls in another direction. A mind governed by reason is not controlled by external events or internal fluctuations. It remains steady because its authority comes from within. This is what it means to dedicate life toward virtue. It is not withdrawal from life. It is full engagement with life under disciplined awareness. It is speaking with clarity instead of reaction. It is choosing with intention instead of impulse. It is enduring difficulty without internal collapse. It is recognizing what belongs to you and what does not. and acting accordingly without confusion. Everything outside your control loses its power to destabilize you when you stop assigning it authority over your judgment. You will still face discomfort. You will still encounter uncertainty. You will still experience emotional movement. But none of these will govern your decisions if reason remains active. At night, you must examine your conduct with honesty, not to criticize yourself, but to understand where alignment was maintained and where it was lost. Ask where you acted without awareness. Ask where impulse overruled judgment. Ask where discipline was present and where it was absent. This reflection is how clarity deepens over time. Without reflection, experience becomes repetition. With reflection, experience becomes correction. As days pass with consistent examination and correction, something profound begins to shift. You stop seeing discipline as external effort and start recognizing it as internal stability. You begin to trust yourself because your actions become consistent with your understanding. The division inside you begins to dissolve. What remains is a mind increasingly unified, not perfect, but aligned, not effortless, but governed, not reactive, but deliberate. You begin to live with less internal noise because fewer decisions are left to impulse. You begin to act with greater steadiness because reason is no longer interrupted as often by reaction. You begin to experience life not as something happening against you, but as something you are actively engaging with through disciplined awareness. This is the meaning of self-mastery, not control over everything around you. Control over the only domain that was ever truly yours, your judgment, your response, your alignment with reason. From this moment forward, the remaining portion of your life does not need to be wasted in repetition of unconscious patterns. It can be directed intentionally toward clarity, discipline, and virtue, not someday, now, and every moment after that.